Hey, what's up, everybody? My name is DJ Martin. I'm church pastor at Parker Ford Church, and this is my good friend Shannon. You want to introduce
Hi.
yourself?
Hi, I'm Shannon Vining from North Point.
And Shannon and I, along with being good friends, along with both of us working in local church settings, we are also artists and love creating things, writing, and specifically music, stories, that sort of thing. And so in our ongoing midweek teaching series, which this is a part of, on the character of God, we've been exploring the character traits of God, the first half of the series, and then we've transitioned into the second half of the series, which is based on God's character. How does he act in the world? What does he do based on his character? And so last week we talked about God speaking, and this week we're talking about God being a creative God, which is why we're having this conversation together. Two local artists, two local people invested in the local church. We want to talk about the character of God being a God who creates. And if you knew nothing about God, like nothing at all, and you opened up your Bible and started reading from the beginning, the first thing that you would learn about God, like think about this. You've never thought about this before. Like think about how profound this is. The very first thing you learn about God when you open up the scriptures, Genesis 1:1, that God is a creative God. In the beginning, before there was anything else, before history, before anything else started, in the beginning, God created. He created everything. The rest of the scriptures teach us that he created the cosmos and the stars and the universe and the vastness of everything that we've come to know. But right away, it teaches that he created the earth and everything in it. The earth is the Lord's and the fullness thereof, which means he is a creative God. So our God not only has these beautiful character traits, but he's a God who creates. And so we're talking about the theology of that, and as well as what it means to be creative artists.
Yeah, and if you keep going and you look a little bit further in Genesis where he makes man in his own image, you could infer from that then men and women are creative as well, right?
Totally. So yeah, just to reemphasize those points, so important. It's not only that God is a creative God, because we're made in his image, like we are to be creators. And so Shannon, when you think about not only God being creative, but us being made in his image to be creative, what are some of the major things you start to get excited about?
Well, I think that being creative is like vast. It doesn't mean just art or music. Madeleine L'Engle, who's the author of Wrinkle in Time, she says in Walking on Water, unless we are creators, we're not fully alive. What do I mean by creators? Not only artists whose acts of creation are the obvious ones of working with paint or clay or words. Creativity is a way of living life, no matter what our vocation or how we earn our living.
That's amazing. If you haven't read Walking on Water, you should read Walking on Water.
It's a good one.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you think about living out your image as someone who bears the image of God, God is a creative God. We're meant to be creative in his image. What's that actually look like in your life?
I think a piece of it is like connecting with God in the creativity. And we have to be careful, right, not to like worship creativity itself, because we have to worship the creator with our creativity. So for me, what I like to do is music. I write songs. I love to write poetry. I paint. What do you do?
Yeah, so since, as many of you know, if you know me, since I was a little kid, writing music has been for me one of the main ways that I've processed life, and it's the way I process all sorts of things. I write songs for my kids. I write, songs. I wrote a song for my wife at our wedding. I write songs about God. I write songs about things I'm struggling with, faith, doubt, questions, all of those things. So like just that act of creating, it feels like that is really when I feel the closest to God. Like when I'm creating. And the strange thing about like being an artist or being creative in that way is like sometimes I'll sing things that I didn't even know I felt.
Right. Yeah.
And then like I like hear it and I'm like, oh my goodness, like I do feel that way. Yeah. Like that just like released something in me. And I can just like picture, like C.S. Lewis uses the imagery of Aslan singing Narnia into creation. Like if you read The
Mhm.
Magician's Nephew, Aslan is singing the cosmos of Narnia into being, which like I think about that in my own life. Like when I'm singing, when I'm writing, like I'm singing stuff into existence.
Yeah.
But it's all based on like what God has said.
Yeah, like I think if you're not being creative, there's a tendency to be a consumer instead. Do you agree with that?
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that more?
We'll see. Maybe you can help me fill in. But I mean, I think our culture is a very consuming culture, right?
Yes.
And so we have to like be intentional about not just sitting and scrolling. And actually, one of my New Year's resolutions is if I'm sitting and I'm on my phone, I'm not scrolling. So I can be like texting or whatever, but I want to like open a note and write a poem and work on that instead if I'm bored just sitting somewhere. Because I have, you know, you're like, I'm in a stage where we hurry up and wait. Like I'm constantly waiting on kids. So I do go on my phone for like 5-10 minutes at a time, but I don't want to just be a consumer.
Right.
Like Pinterest or Facebook or whatever. Like I want to even use that space to try to be creative, you know?
Yeah, that's really good. What comes to mind for me, an example of that is like, and consuming is not all bad. Like we were created to consume. Like we have to eat, we have to breathe, we have to consume oxygen, so on, water. So it's not all bad. Jesus says, consume my body. So we're meant to consume, but we're meant to consume in very specific ways. And so it's got to be also in the balance of being creative.
That's good. Yeah.
And like thinking about like, Julie and I usually try to do a garden, and sometimes successful, sometimes not. This past year was not so successful, but we try to do a garden, and there's something about that, like growing your own vegetables, right? Where like you're gonna consume them, but the joy of gardening is in the creative like process and watching it grow way more than it is in like just having a bite of cucumber, even though that's great. Like, but the payoff is the actual like creation in the process.
Wow, it makes me wonder like what God thinks about when he looks at his creation. If we get that much joy out of just watching a cucumber grow, like how much more does he in watching his earth and the heavens and all of that? Like that must be crazy.
That's amazing. Yeah. I'm also thinking, like we were praying beforehand, and as we were praying, I was thinking about Psalm 8, where David is looking at everything that God has created, like just how beautiful it is. Like when I look at the stars of the heavens, when I think about earth, when I think about the angels, and then he's like, and then I think about man, and you've crowned him a little lower than the angels. Like, who am I that you're mindful of me? It's like amazing, like our creative God who made stars trillions of, you know, light years away and galaxies and all this, like what he's most excited about is actually us, like who he's placed his image in, and like drawing us into deeper intimacy with him. And so his creative power isn't just like making something beautiful, it's about relationship.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because when he says let us make man in our image, like there is a collaborative communal piece to creating, right? He was in perfect community with himself as the Trinity when he created the world, and so I think we have to not sometimes whatever you're choosing to do, try to share it with someone if you can, or do it with someone,
which we both can testify to. The hardest part is sharing it. It's much easier to write a song and just keep it to myself, because there's so much vulnerability when I'm like, hey Shannon, or you know, whoever, like listen to this, because there can be rejection or there can be different tastes and all of that. And so there is deep vulnerability, but it's really important in community. And think about how vulnerable God is with his creation. Like he made it for all of us to be like his audience in a way, which is like, that's pretty cool. I don't know that I've thought about that in that way before when it comes to like art and him, being vulnerable.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah, what other aspects would you like to speak to when it comes to like, what if you're listening to this and you're like, I'm not an artist? Like, what would you say is really important to take away from God being creative?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone is creative in some way. So whether it's how you dress and the outfit that you pick out that day, or a meal that you're making for your family, or a project that you're working on at work, I think we have to remember that, like, yeah, we can't box creativity in. I do think there's also something about that word tov that we talked about a few weeks back with goodness, and when God created things, it was good. And so it's hard to separate beauty and creativity, because our goal is always to make something beautiful, right? To make something good. So yeah, so tov is like pleasing to the senses, beautiful.
Yeah.
And so that,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. It's tov.
Yeah.
When God creates, it's tov.
Yeah.
I think about like too, because this is like the first thing we learn about God, and because, like, to your point, God made us in his image, whether or not you feel like you are, in the strict sense, like an artist, like you may not paint, you may not write poetry. One of the other points we were trying to really drive home is the communal relational nature of creativity. We all know the statistics right now, like 50% of Americans say that they don't have one close friend. So anytime that you're walking in relationship, deep relationship with someone else, it's an act of creation. It's an act of, like, you're creating like connection, you're creating conversation, you're creating connection, purpose, love, all of those things. So you might be a stay-at-home mom or dad, you might be someone who works in IT, you might, like, whatever your circumstances are, anytime that you're engaging another image bearer of God in relationship, you're actually participating in the creative work of God, in an artistic way, which would probably be something good to wrestle through and think through in your own context.
The other thought that I had was, God continues to create today.
Yes.
Like he did, we see in Genesis that he created everything, but he sustains everything, and he continues to create. I mean, anytime you see like a newborn baby or flowers in the spring, right? Like that's an indicator, like he's still creating. And so I guess one of the questions I'd like to leave you with is, how can we look for God as creator and worship him in that way? I don't know that I take too much time to like worship God specifically as creator. And so as we were preparing for this, that's one of the things I was trying to do this morning and yesterday, is just like, thank you for creating. Thank you for creating this beautiful tov world. Thank you for creating me and my family and friends, and looking for ways that he sustains that creation as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You, in our notes, you have this beautiful note with the final thoughts. Do you want to share?
Sure, yeah. Just, this is kind of like a random thing, but the root of the word humble and the word human is the same, hummus, which is earth. We are dust. So it's important to remember that we are the created beings. And we did touch on that earlier. Like, we are the created beings. He is the creator. And yet we are called and privileged to co-create with him.
We really like talking about art and music, and
talk to us about it anytime.
Yeah, feel free. And if you are an artist, maybe you're secretly an artist and are writing poetry or that kind of thing, we'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and I am actually working on doing some collaborative work with artists and musicians. So definitely, like, shoot me an email if that's something that you're looking for deeper community within creativity.
Absolutely. We want to leave you with a final question, which is, you're an image bearer of God, and he's a creative God. So how might you use your God-given, God-made creativity to glorify God? How is God calling you to glorify him through being creative today, whether that's, growing vegetables, growing a child in your womb, painting and painting, whatever it is, God has called you to be creative. So I do that with gladness. Any final thoughts or blessings? That's great. Well, thanks for joining us. We love and appreciate you all. Have a great day. Go with God. Be blessed. Bye-bye.